I know you are out there listening right now because, well, you're the kind of person who looks at the world and wants to know exactly why things are the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just want those, surface level facts. You want to understand the hidden forces pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Right. The deeper blueprint?
Exactly. And if you have that kind of curiosity, you are going to absolutely love what we're jumping into today. I want you to try and picture something in your mind right now.
Okay.
Imagine you're standing in the middle of the Sahara Desert. The heat is just shimmering. It's absolutely punishing, and there is nothing but sand and baked rock in literally every direction.
Just a completely hostile environment?
Yeah, totally hostile. But right in front of you is a perfect line of palm trees, an oasis. And I don't mean like a small cluster where a few travelers might stop.
No, this is massive.
Right. This street of palm trees stretches in a perfectly straight, totally unnatural line for over 1,000 kilometers across the desert.
It's just a stunning visual, really. Like a
Yeah.
ribbon of lush, vibrant life, completely defying this barren, sun-scorched landscape around it.
It's wild. And now I want you to take that image, just hold on to it, and suddenly transport yourself hundreds of miles north, looking out over the sparkling blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, this is where it gets good.
Deep down at the bottom of that sea, lost to time, lies a sunken ghost continent, a massive landmass that it just collapsed and vanished beneath the waves.
Just gone.
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 So you've got a 1,000-kilometer street of palms in the dead of the desert and a drowned ghost continent at the bottom of the ocean. And the question is, how on earth do these two things connect?
That is the ultimate puzzle we are decoding on this deep dive. Because, those two seemingly unrelated anomalies are actually the hidden underground architects of human history.
Which is just mind-blowing. We are jumping into a truly fascinating text today. It's an old one, a 1922 French geological study called Structure de l'Algérie, The Structure of Algeria, by Émile Félix Gautier.
Yeah, Gautier was really ahead of his time with this. And our mission today isn't just to look at ancient rocks.
Yeah.
Our goal is to uncover how massive tectonic collisions, vanished oceans, and, deep terrestrial scars actively dictated the cultures, the languages, and the historic battles of North Africa.
We're basically looking at the geological blueprint of an entire civilization.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we even touch the sands of Algeria, we have to look out into the water. Because to understand how North Africa got squeezed into its current shape, the text suggests we have to talk about the Alpine system.
We do.
Which, to be honest, threw me off a bit at first. I mean, what do the Alps have to do with the Sahara?
Yeah, it sounds completely counterintuitive. But when geologists talk about the Alpine system, they mean a massive chain that includes the Alps, the Apennines in Italy, the Baetic Cordillera in Spain, and the Rif Mountains in Morocco.
Oh, wow. So it's huge.
It spans across all of that. And if you look at these mountain ranges on a map, they don't run in straight lines. They curve. They form this massive sweeping hook that wraps all the way around the Western Mediterranean.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, mountains don't just curve for no reason. It's not like nature just made a stylistic choice.
No, definitely not.
When I was looking at the maps and the source, I was thinking about it like watching a river. If you see water suddenly divert and curve in a stream, you instantly know there is a massive invisible boulder under the surface causing it to bend, right?
That's a really good way to look at it.
The mountains are acting like water flowing around something massive. So what exactly did these huge mountain ranges crash into?
They crashed into a colossal battering ram. Geologists call it the Tyrannid or the Tyrrhenian mass.
The Tyrannid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an ancient, incredibly rigid continent made of hard crystalline rock that once occupied the entire Western Mediterranean.
Wait, crystalline rock, like what are we talking about here? Quartz or diamonds?
Oh, no, not quite. Think of it more as rock that has been cooked and compressed under so much heat and pressure that it becomes incredibly dense and hard, like granite,
Oh, gotcha. Like the countertops.
Exactly. And as the Earth's crust shifted, this rigid continent acted as an immovable block. It literally shoved the Atlas Mountains southward.
Wow.
Yeah, forcing the whole Alpine mountain system to warp and wrap entirely around it. And then, having done its monumental work, the Tyrannid just shattered and sank to the bottom of the sea.
A sunken continent. I know it sounds exactly like Atlantis.
It really does.
But what kind of hard evidence does a 1922 geology book actually have to prove that a massive landmass just fell into the ocean?
Well, the evidence is actually incredibly tangible. fragments of this ghost continent are still clinging to the modern coasts right now.
Really? Where?
If you look at islands like Corsica and Sardinia, they're made entirely of these ancient crystalline rocks. And here's the kicker. Those rocks have absolutely zero relation to the mainland of Italy, which they're sitting right next to.
Oh, that's wild. So there are basically like geological orphans.
Exactly like orphans. And you see the exact same thing in Algeria.
Oh, right. The text mentioned that.
Yeah, at coastal points like Bouzarea and Cap Matifu, there are these jagged, alien crystalline rocks glued to the coast that just don't match the inland geology of Africa at all.
Gautier calls them the jagged edges left behind from the fracture.
Yes. But the evidence isn't just in the rocks that remained. It's actually in the scars of the collapse itself.
What do you mean by scars?
Well, when a massive landmass, like the Tyrannid, breaks apart and sinks, it violently tears the Earth's crust open. And the scar of that collapse is actually a ring of coastal volcanoes.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying famous volcanoes like Vesuvius are just the leftover scars of this continent ripping away?
That is precisely what they are.
No way.
Yeah, Vesuvius, Mount Etna, Cap Gata in Spain, they all trace the outline of this sunken mass.
That is fascinating.
And in Algeria, this contrast is incredibly striking. The entire interior of the country has absolutely zero eruptive volcanic rocks.
Right.
But the exact moment you hit the coast and the coastal islands, volcanic rock is everywhere. It's the literal tear line where the continent ripped away.
That is just wild. But, what about life?
Like animals.
Yeah. If there was a massive landmass connecting all these places, wouldn't there be some kind of biological proof left behind, like fossils or something?
There is. And it is arguably the most fascinating proof of all. Gautier cites the findings of a zoologist named Forsyth Major.
Okay.
He examined tiny 200-hectare Italian islands, places like Pianosa. And on these tiny specks of land, they found subfossils of full-size deer.
Hold on a second. A full-size deer doesn't evolve on a rock the size of a golf course.
Right.
I mean, there literally wouldn't be enough food to sustain a population for a single generation, let alone enough time for them to evolve there.
Exactly. They had to have walked there back when it was part of a massive landmass with a sprawling ecosystem.
That makes perfect sense.
And the connections get even more specific. There are 16 mammal species native to Corsica and Sardinia today.
Okay.
7 of those species match the animals living in North Africa, in Algeria.
Oh, wow.
But those same 7 species are entirely missing from mainland Italy.
Wait, really? So at some point, you could literally walk your dog from Algiers all the way to Sardinia without getting your feet wet.
You absolutely could. The biological isolation is basically the smoking gun for the geological collapse.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we've established that the Atlas Mountains were squeezed horizontally from east to west by the crushing weight of this sunken continent.
Right.
But to truly understand how this shaped North Africa, we have to look at how this horizontal mountain chain was violently sliced apart by north-south forces coming up from the deep Sahara.
Which brings us right back to that 1,000-kilometer street of palms we started with, the Rue de Pommiers.
Yes.
If I am understanding this right, that line of trees is actually hiding a massive north-south fracture called the Tuat-Roussillon Fault.
Exactly.
No.
It is a massive structural crack running perpendicular to the mountains, just intersecting them.
Okay, I have to push back on this a bit, though.
Sure, go ahead.
Because when I hear the words massive geological fault, I picture total devastation, an abyss, earthquakes tearing the ground apart.
Right, destruction.
Yeah. How does a violent tear in the earth equal a lush 1,000-kilometer garden in the middle of the most hostile desert on the planet?
You have to visualize what a fault line actually does to the hidden layers of earth beneath your feet.
Okay.
When the ground fractures and shifts vertically, it brings completely different types of rock into direct side-by-side contact with one another.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Let's say you have a highly permeable rock, like sandstone, which is super porous and allows underground water to flow right through it.
Right.
Suddenly, because of the fault, that sandstone gets slammed right up against a layer of dense, impermeable clay.
So the water flowing through the sandstone suddenly hits a brick wall.
Yes, the underground water hits that impermeable wall of clay and has absolutely nowhere to go but straight up.
Oh, wow.
So this violent geological fracture is essentially functioning as a 1,000-kilometer-long natural plumbing system.
That is brilliant.
It forces deep, life-saving artesian water directly to the desert surface. That is the exact mechanism that allows those oases to form in that perfect straight line.
The destruction of the rock is literally what brings the water to the surface.
Exactly.
And if we follow that street of palms north, we eventually hit the Atlas Mountains at a place called Figyug, specifically in the Zusfana Valley.
And the Zusfana Valley is where this Saharan fault line literally crashes into the Atlas Mountains. The result is a total split in reality.
Yeah, the source text describes the terrain on either side of this valley, and they sound like two entirely different planets.
They really do.
If you look to the west, you have the Maize and the Grouse Mountains. The text notes this area is made of violently folded, jagged Jurassic limestone.
And when we say Jurassic limestone, we are talking about rock laid down tens of millions of years ago, back when dinosaurs walked the Earth.
Right.
Rock that has since been totally crushed and twisted by the Earth's movements.
And because it has been so violently twisted, it is just a barren desert of stone. The rock is described as yellow like honey, completely naked and contorted into these terrifying sharp needles.
It's totally welcome.
There is absolutely no human habitation there. A few hunters might pass through, but you cannot survive there. But then you just step across the fault line to the east.
And to the east, you have the Beni Smear.
And it is completely different. It is flat, calm, slightly undulating Albian sandstone.
Yep.
And because sandstone acts like that sponge we talked about, it holds a vast spring of water. There are ancient rock engravings. There are cultivated fields.
It's an oasis.
There is an entire permanent human village called Tectonic perched right on top of it. You literally step across an invisible geological line and go from a jagged, uninhabitable deathscape to a thriving, ancient human village.
It perfectly illustrates how geology dictates habitability. But, that contrast scales up dramatically when you look at something called the Tamalot Plain.
Oh, the Tamalot is hard to even wrap your head around. It's like someone took a giant eraser and just wiped out the mountains for 50 kilometers. Imagine a massive flat plain 50 kilometers wide, slicing the entire Atlas mountain range in half. On the western edge of this flat plain, you have the towering Moroccan high Atlas Mountains, peaking at 4,000 meters.
Very tall.
But on the eastern edge, you have the Saharan Atlas, which are only half that height.
The Tamalot Plain is basically an exposed nerve of the ancient Earth. It is made of Silurian rock, which means it is incredibly ancient.
How ancient are we talking?
We are talking over 400 million years old, long before trees or complex land animals even existed.
That is almost impossible to fathom.
It really is. It is a slice of the primary planetary crust, laying completely bare, right in the middle of a much younger mountain range.
Wow.
But what makes the Tamalot so crucial isn't just the age of the rock. It is the profound impact it had on human civilization. At the wells of the Tamalot, two totally different worlds collide.
Okay, hold on. I want to challenge this.
Go for it.
I can easily see how rocks dictate where a village goes because of water, right? We just talked about that.
Sure.
But the source claims this geology literally created a 1,000-year blood feud between peoples. Aren't we giving rocks a little too much credit for human sociology and behavior?
It sounds like a stretch at first, until you look at the mechanics of survival in those two environments.
Okay, lay it out for me.
To the east of the plain, out on the flat expanse, you have the Beni Gil. They are nomadic, Arabic-speaking horsemen.
Okay.
Their entire culture, economy, and military strength rely on movement, grazing animals, and open plains. They literally need the flat geography to exist.
Okay, that makes total sense for the nomads.
But to the west, up at the towering, craggy mountains, you have Berber-speaking villagers. They are sedentary farmers.
Right, they stay put.
Exactly. They build fortified, stationary communities rooted deep in the valleys. They rely on defensive high ground and terrace farming.
I see the problem.
Yeah. A nomad cannot maneuver horses in those crags, and a farmer cannot grow crops on the baked, windy plains of the nomads.
They're completely incompatible.
Exactly. The geography doesn't just separate them. It forces them into entirely incompatible ways of life right next to each other.
Wow.
They have looked across this geological divide and fought for over a millennium because their fundamental modes of survival, which are dictated by the terrain, are completely at odds. The tectonic scar literally became the cultural scar.
Okay, I see it now. The environment shapes the economy shapes the culture, and the cultures clash.
Precisely.
It just blows my mind that human conflicts can be traced back to the way rocks fractured hundreds of millions of years ago.
It's geology as destiny.
But this raises another question for me. We've seen the grid, the east-west mountains squeezed by the ghost continent and the north-south faults slicing through them.
Yeah.
But how did this landmass physically build itself up from the desert floor to become mountains in the first place? I mean, if it wasn't a sunken continent and it wasn't a desert, what was it?
To understand the construction of the land itself, we have to look at a concept called a geosyncline.
Okay, let's pretend I don't have a PhD in earth sciences. What exactly is a geosyncline?
Fair enough. Think of it as a giant geological accordion operating entirely underwater.
An underwater accordion. I like that.
Yeah. For long geological ages, Algeria wasn't solid land at all. It was a highly unstable, watery trench trapped between two massive rigid continents.
Which ones?
The Saharan platform down to the south, and our ghost continent, the Tyrannid, to the north.
Okay.
Because it was constantly being squeezed like a vice between these two immovable blocks, the floor of this sea was constantly buckling, flooding, folding, and sinking over millions of years.
So it's just a restless ocean floor getting crumpled into mountains.
Exactly. And the depth of this sea varied wildly, which ended up having massive economic implications for the modern world.
Really? How so?
During what geologists call the Eocene era, roughly 50 million years ago, long after the dinosaurs went extinct, the northern part of this sea, the Tell region, was a deep, dark abyss.
Okay.
But the southern part, over the high plateaus, was made up of very shallow, warm waters.
And that shallow water is where the magic happened, right?
It is.
The text describes how, in those shallow southern waters, millions upon millions of marine animals died and settled on the bottom. Because the water was so shallow, the bones didn't dissolve before hitting the seabed. They just piled up, layer upon layer, over eons.
Just massive boneyards.
Yeah. And today, those compacted layers of ancient marine death are the source of Algeria's massive modern-day wealth of phosphate deposits, which are crucial for global agriculture.
The shallow waters essentially built a modern economic empire out of fossils. It's incredible.
It really is.
But the deep waters in the north left an entirely different, yet equally vital, legacy.
Oh.
In that deep abyss, immense layers of distinct sandstones and clays were deposited, which geologists call the Numidian flysch.
When I was reading about the Numidian flysch in the source material, I kept trying to picture how it works. Tell me if this analogy holds up.
Let's hear it.
It's like taking a giant, incredibly porous natural sponge and setting it down directly on top of a heavy, waterproof tarp. The sandstone is the sponge. It drinks up every single drop of rainwater that hits it. But the dense clay underneath is the tarp. It prevents the water from draining away deep into the earth.
I love that.
So the sponge just holds all that water perfectly right near the surface.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The porosity of the sandstone combined with the impermeability of the clay creates an incredible, massive natural reservoir.
Wow.
And that specific geological quirk creates a true botanical miracle. It is the sole reason why the mountainous Kabylia region, located in an otherwise harsh and very dry part of the world, boasts these massive, unexpected forests of giant cork oak trees.
Which makes that specific region a global hub for cork production today.
It does.
It is amazing to think that ancient mud settling at the bottom of a dark abyss 50 million years ago is literally determining modern global economics.
The geological history actively writes the human history. It determines where the wealth is, where the water is, and ultimately where the people can survive.
So we know how the terrain forced nomads and farmers into conflict. But how did these ancient, dried-up seas shape the massive empires that swept through North Africa?
That's a great question.
I mean, humans moving massive armies must have stumbled into geological traps set millions of years before they were even born.
They absolutely did. And to see exactly how, we have to look at another one of those deep north-south trenches we discussed earlier.
Oh, okay.
This specific trench created what historians and geologists call the Biskra Breach.
The Biskra Breach. And standing guard over this breach is a geological anomaly called Elutaya, which is just wild to read about.
It is entirely bizarre.
It is a monstrous 300-meter-tall solid mountain of salt.
Yes.
It's a sheer, massive block of salt towering over the landscape. How does salt even become a mountain? Doesn't it just wash away when it rains?
Well, under normal circumstances, yes, it would. But mountains of salt like Elutaya are clear geological markers of deep, violent fractures in the earth.
Oh, because of the pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Deep underground, ancient beds of salt were subjected to immense tectonic pressure because salts can behave plastically under extreme pressure.
Wait, plastic like toothpaste?
Yeah, exactly like toothpaste.
Yeah.
It was violently squeezed upward through the fracture in the Earth's crust until it just breached the surface.
That is so weird.
It is. But historically, the Biskra Breach itself was even more important than the salt mountain guarding it,
Why is that?
because the breach completely interrupted the continuous impenetrable line of the mountains, creating a natural, flat highway from the deep Sahara straight into the northern plains.
And because it was the easiest path, like the path of least resistance for horses and foot soldiers, it became the ultimate invasion highway.
Yes, human empires behave exactly like water. They constantly seek the easiest path through an obstacle.
That makes sense.
The Ibidites used it to push north. The Zenata people spread through it, and when the monumental Arab invasion swept into North Africa, led by historical figures like Sidi Akba, they poured their massive armies right through the Biskra Breach. The history of conquest in Algeria is essentially the history of armies blindly following the paths carved by water and tectonic faults millions of years prior.
It's like the Earth laid out a red carpet for invasion and just waited for humans to use it.
That's exactly what happened.
And it wasn't just about how to get in, either. The geology also dictated where empires built their unassailable strongholds.
Right, the fortresses.
The source goes into deep detail about the Great Hagar Lagoet Ridge. It's this massive subterranean spine of rock that acts like a solid wall between the eastern and western halves of the northern Tell region.
It is the ultimate geographical choke point. If you control that ridge, you control the flow of trade, the movement of armies, and communication between the East and the West. You divide and conquer.
Which is exactly why, for thousands of years, every single major empire built their fortress capitals right along that exact ridge.
You couldn't resist it.
You have the ancient city of Akir, hidden up in the mountains. You have Caesarea, which is modern-day Churchill down on the coast. And eventually, the modern capital of Algiers itself. They aren't there by accident. They are all perched on top of a tectonic spine because it offers the ultimate strategic high ground.
Yeah.
And the kings and generals who built those cities likely knew absolutely nothing about the deep tectonic forces colliding beneath their feet. They just knew the terrain made them powerful.
They were just the latest temporary residents sitting on top of an ancient geological masterpiece.
That is such a good way to put it. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking out over the Mediterranean at a sunken ghost continent, the Tyrannid, whose violent collapse left a ring of volcanoes and isolated deer stranded on tiny islands.
Which is still my favorite detail.
Same. Then we traced a 1,000-kilometer fault line that disguised itself as a street of palm trees across the deep Sahara by pumping artesian water to the surface.
A literal line of life.
We looked at how the ancient buckling Susonian Sea turned marine bones into modern phosphate wealth, and how a sponge and tarp layer of deep-sea rock created giant cork forests.
Geology driving the modern economy.
And finally, we saw how the very boundaries between nomadic horsemen and sedentary villagers and the invasion routes of ancient empires were perfectly mapped onto these deep, million-year-old tectonic scars.
You know, when you look at how completely our human story is dictated by these ancient terrestrial scars, it raises an entirely new, incredibly provocative thought.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Think about the future. Right now, humanity is looking up at the stars, planning to build the first human colonies on Mars or the Moon.
Right, the new frontier.
But when we get there, we won't be looking for pre-existing cities or human borders. We will be doing exactly what our ancestors unwittingly did here on Earth.
Wait, you mean we'll be looking for geology?
Yes, we will be aggressively scanning for ancient fault lines, dried-up geosynclines, and geological intersections, because that is exactly where the trapped ice and resources will be.
Wow. So the very first extraterrestrial cities will be dictated by tectonic scars from billions of years ago on another planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are going to repeat this exact same geological blueprint, blindly following the hidden architecture of another world.
We might leave the Earth behind, but we can never truly escape the geology. Something to chew on.